if you have Kevin Durant and Devin Booker at the top of your roster, offensive process and the ways in which you go about implementing one over the course of games and an entire season should never be an issue. Welcome to Volume 2 of Where the Suns Went Wrong, where we'll be diving into the details on the pairing of Devin Booker and Kevin Durant and explaining why the offensive process that they were involved in just simply was not nearly good enough to support the top end talent that they had. And I feel like they left a lot of food on the table this season regarding usage of those two, especially considering the efficiency and effectiveness of those two when they were playing off of one another. And naturally also the demands that a defense is posed with when you have those two type of high level creators and scorers at three levels on the court at the same time. So without further ado, let's dive into it. First of all, we want to thank you and let you know that we appreciate y'all for tapping in. If you don't know, my name is Stephen PridGeon-Garner. Thank you for your time. And before we get started, I also want to remind you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the video, subscribe to PHNX Sports YouTube channel. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it. So first thing we're going to be looking at this season, or for this season, is Devin Booker and his scoring averages on the season to kind of paint a picture piece by piece and what we're getting to. So looking at Devin Booker, 25.6 points per game this season. Nothing to scoff at, lower than the season prior and the season prior before that one, but still very formidable. The 33.2% three-point percentage is something that I don't think we'll ever see be as low as it was for him this past season. You look at the 46.1%, that's a solid number considering the volume of contested jumpers that he takes, and also in respect to the lack of a whistle that he gets in addition to all of that, which leads me to the last one. Him shooting 89.4% from the free throw line was very fun to see this season. I don't think it's out the realm of possibility that he flirts with a 50-40-90 season, maybe even as soon as next season, but surely before his career is done. And let's go ahead and transition to the Kevin Durant side of things here now. And looking at KD's season, it was another historic season for a player, especially at his age. And you see his 26.6 points per game. I think that number creeps up significantly closer to 30, as well as with Devin Booker, if the offensive process that they're involved with is much more layered, much more nuanced, and much more consistent. KD, the big thing for me this season, 43% from deep on near career high volumes of attempts from deep. And obviously you consider the context. Handful of pull-up jumpers included with that, but him also sacrificing the on-ball to be a spacer and to play off of the catch and shoot to the prolific rates at which he did this season. Also upholding a 52.7% shooting from the field percentage. And then I think maybe the biggest quote-unquote where he left more to be desired would be the free throw attempt percentage in particular. Shooting 83.9%. That's one of his lowest in his career. I don't think that's a number that holds up going into next season. If the Suns are able to keep these two players together, they have two players that are bona fide three-level scorers, all type of attention that they garner just as a template from a defense. And when they're used in actions together, that just compromises the defense even more. And to that point, when we look at across the entire NBA this season, teams that had multiple players that were ranked in the elites in terms of points per game, there were only a couple of teams. There was only one team actually that had that to boast and brag about in terms of looking at it on paper. And that was your Phoenix Suns, where the Suns had two players that were both top, or they were over 25 points per game, and they were top 12 in scoring. That in and of itself as a template, if you're looking at, okay, this roster has these two players, they're producing to this level, there's no other team that can replicate on the efficiency, but also on the points per game total, what they did. Naturally, you think you're talking about a team that's top 7, top 6, no worse than top 5 in offense just because of the template and the things that they're working with in terms of dynamics. And that was not the case this season. And I feel like stemming from the volume 1 of this series, where we're looking at where the Suns went wrong, yes, we talked about them losing the plot on offense. And I think the first domino in the plot being lost was the lack of nuance and usage with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant used in primary actions together. Before we get to that point, though, let's take a look at the numbers when those two were passing the ball to one another. And we'll start with Devin Booker assisting to Kevin Durant. And we'll look at the numbers and the efficiency from there. So 100 total assists from Devin Booker to Kevin Durant. Needless to say, that's the most assists to a teammate this season that Devin Booker had. 56 of those assists went to the three-point line. Just think about that. That is a bevy of assists in total going to a specific player. And obviously you put in tandem with that KD's efficiency from deep. And you start to see the picture of why this tandem is so prolific. You put Durant a pass away from Devin Booker, probably not getting help. On the rare occasion that we saw them cheat over and try to help to stop a Devin Booker drive in the direction that Kevin Durant is a pass away from, I think 80% of the time that probably ended in a three-pointer that reminded them quickly, oh yeah, you can't help off of Kevin Durant, even if it is Devin Booker that's going to potentially be driving down an open lane. And to that point, also 44 assists to two-point field goals made. I think that number is relevant because it should have been higher if they were used in tandem the ways in which I feel like they should have been, which we'll be diving into shortly. And then the last big one, the corner three-pointers for Kevin Durant that came from Devin Booker. Now, some of these came from the ball swinging around the horn, and after the Suns re-space, Devin Booker happens to be on the wing, and Kevin Durant is in that same corner on the same side as Devin Booker. But a handful also came from Devin Booker playing in pick and roll, and the Suns emptying the side, and spaced off of who's the low man for a defense is Kevin Durant. So that low man is stepping into the paint to try to shrink the floor and take away the roller as Devin Booker gets double teamed in pick and roll. And Devin Booker is able to hold the second side defense, which speaks to his playmaking growth, make that corner skip, and that corner skip going to Kevin Durant in particular, knowing that he has to be helped off of because of the ways in which the low man has to take away the roller. Defenses literally just can't be right in that scenario. That's a space and template I don't feel like they cycled through nearly enough this season. And I think the numbers on the efficiency that we just got done seeing from Devin Booker passes for Kevin Durant in terms of shooting and scoring, they say that it should have been leaned into a whole lot more. And as we get to the Kevin Durant portion of him assisting to Devin Booker, you'll see that a lot was left more to be desired in terms of the efficiency on these shots that came from a Kevin Durant pass for Devin Booker. But I think that also speaks to them just not being as nuanced with how those two are being featured off of one another. A handful of the assists that came in a positive manner in terms of results on efficiency for Devin Booker from Kevin Durant came from him being a pass away. So imagine Devin Booker enters it into the post to Kevin Durant. And naturally, most teams are going to be inclined to help from the top instead of helping from low. And that means that Devin Booker has a rotating defender coming directly to him, to which he can, it's his pick of the litter. He can catch and shoot off of the pass coming from Kevin Durant. He can attack that closing defender that's coming from likely the top side of the court, which gives him an angle in terms of leverage to attack the top foot and then get to the midi or play into the paint and get to the bucket. And there's just a myriad of different options that he has in that scenario. But I think Kevin Durant also did a good job of when Devin Booker was two passes away. If he wasn't the entry passer for his post-ups, he would be that person that's at the top of the key. And as that person that's off of the person that double-teamed is now being helped, the helper scenarios, you see Devin Booker be wide open top side, similar to how we just got done speaking to him being one pass away. Point being, though, they could have got a lot more out of the passes that came from Kevin Durant if they were more nuanced in their approach off of his post-ups. And that naturally leads us to kind of the plot of everything that we'll be speaking to in this volume 2 of this series. They were done a disservice greatly with how they were not used in actions nearly as often as they should have been. The one scenario that we know we saw them in often, it was their bread and butter last season in the clutch especially, but generally when they wanted to get a bucket and use those two in action, it was just Devin Booker setting screens for Kevin Durant in pick and roll and vice versa. If teams want to switch that, it's going to leave one of those two with an advantage. And if there's any type of hesitation, one of those two is getting a wide open shot. Very simple, very easy, yet super dynamic and compromising the defense. That's good, but what else? And that leads us to the first thing that I want to speak to, which is pace and tempo for the Suns this season. So coming into the season, we heard Tyus Jones, who I got to speak to directly about it, and we heard Mike Budenholzer talk about pace, tempo. Pace being playing a style of play that's going to up the possessions total of a game, and tempo being how quickly are they moving through actions and sets and moving the ball around the court in a side-to-side fashion in the half court. To the pace point, they started the season solid in terms of pace. They were in the top 10, top 11 when they went through that 8-1 stretch through the first 2.5 weeks or so. After that, though, which is consistent with the lost the plot dynamic of the first volume of this series, they just went away from it and they were never able to reestablish it. Even if you are giving up the barrage of buckets that you are to your opponents, you can still create pace by quickly inbounding the ball, getting across the half-court line with 22, 23 sometimes, if not 21 seconds on the shot clock. And you think about it from the defense's perspective, if you're getting across the half-court line with that much time, that leaves that much of a portion of time on the shot clock that you will have to defend. You put that in tandem with thinking about the ways that the Suns should have been able to pressure their opponents defensively. That's a lot to deal with. Imagine a Devin Booker pick and roll that's getting to the ball with 22, 21, 20 seconds on the shot clock. You make a pass out of that, whether it goes to the roller or someone else out of that, and then it goes to the second side, and now it's Kevin Durant maybe working off of a handoff, or Kevin Durant maybe working off of a post-up that came from the defense having to switch because of the ways they had to tilt the court and rotate off of a Devin Booker pick and roll, happening with 20 seconds on the clock. That's a lot of rotating and decision-making, and if it's not sharp, an advantage is going to be created directly from it or within the movement that comes from that of the basketball as the defense has to shapeshift and catch up to the ball in terms of how it's moving around the court for the Suns. That's just one template, and we didn't see nearly enough of it. Like I said, they started the season well with it, especially off of misses. Tyus Jones was quick and decisive with getting the ball up the court, usually the one of Booker or Durant, to get into an early attack before the defense could get set. That's one layer of it. And then you get to the part where they're giving up points to opponents. Early in the season, we still saw Yusuf Nurkic immediately getting the ball out the net, inbounding it to Tyus Jones, and he's immediately getting into an action. It might be a Tyus Jones-Nurkic pick and roll early. Maybe nothing comes of that. And then it kicks to Devin Booker, and now it's multiple pick and rolls to where now with Tyus Jones, it might be drop. He might penetrate or probe. Nothing's there. He kicks it to Devin Booker, and now Yusuf Nurkic runs back up, sprints from the baseline or from the dunker spot somewhere, and now it's Devin Booker. So that big that wasn't dropped with Tyus Jones now has to get up to the level, flat hedge, if not outright blitz, Devin Booker. And you imagine just how taxing, how compromising that is. Multiply that times 50 to 60 possessions. If you're consistently hammering home this pace emphasis, you can compromise the defense. That literal template is copied and pasted to what we're seeing with the Indiana Pacers in the playoffs. They have a myriad of pick and roll options, whether it's Tyrese Halliburton led, or it's Andrew Nembhard initiating offense, or it's Pascal Siakam initiating offense. But they're so keyed in and they're so in alignment with playing with that pace that it's compromised the Cleveland Cavaliers and put their defense in disadvantage so early in the shot clock that they have their pick of the litter of options in terms of what shot they decide to take as a team once you get to even 15 or 14 seconds, yet alone on a rare occasion that they're taking a shot when there's 5 seconds or less on the clock. Matchups are in disarray, rotations are late, communication slippages galore, and you get the shot that you want, which is either a shot at the rim that's uncontested or a catch and shoot three-point opportunity. And if you take that template, you apply it to the Suns, who are one of the best three-point shooting talent teams in terms of catch and shoot across the league, you play to that pace, you keep teams in disadvantage defensively, you have a fail-proof philosophy of approach. And that's just one layer to our offense that's being led by Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. So that pace and tempo dynamic is not something that went the way that the Suns desired for it to past the first, I would give them the first 2 months of the regular season, speaking to them losing the plot on offense. Now we get to movement on offense. And I pose a question to you all. How often did you feel like you saw Devin Booker running off of screens off ball, true to his shooting guard nature, whether it be him running off of staggers, whether it be him working off of pin downs in an empty corner, whether it be him working off of middle pin downs, whether it even be him working off of elbow action where he's set up in horns opposite of a center or someone else that's on the Suns. They set a cross screen for him to get the ball in the slot or the wing area, and then they get into whatever action that they wanted to run, which was a hallmark of Kevin Young's offense for the last 3 to 4 seasons that preceded this past season. that we just got done with? That's an honest question, and it's probably taking you a long time to think about, man, when did I really see him getting into that? That's one layer in terms of me speaking to them losing the plot and them leaving food on the table. In alignment with there, last season we spent a lot of time talking about Kevin Durant and their process with getting him post-up touches. Them setting cross screens, setting slice screens, setting flex screens for him to get post positioning. And that subtle bit of movement leading to him getting a catch point that's advantageous to him so that his catches aren't taking place at the logo or aren't taking place closer to the three-point line than it is in respect to the block or the paint, where his height becomes that much more of an advantage and the double teams are less effective because his pass is closer to the players that he's going to be passing it to, especially on the second side. Weren't happening often enough. The Suns were just coming down court this season, especially after the November-December stretch, and they were just trying to get directly into actions without having put a defense in compromise to make decisions before they get to whatever trigger it is that they wanted to work to. Where were the cross screens for Kevin Durant to get post positioning? Where were the cross screens, the pin down variations, the dribble handoff and the screens, or screen and the dribble handoff? They call it zoom action. Where were all of those scenarios that we saw the Suns cycling through with Devin Booker for the past 5 or 6 seasons, and in tandem with Kevin Durant for the last 2 to 3 seasons or 2 seasons that preceded this past season? That's an honest question. And them losing the plot on that, not those 2 players, but the team structure and the approach to offense identity-wise that they're operating in, it just wasn't conducive to getting the absolute most out of these top-end talents and top-end scoring and creators that you have on your roster. You lose a plot on those things, you start to see that then work against those 2, because if you're not getting into any movement with either of those 2, making a defense make decisions, potentially flip matchups before you get to the actual play that you want to run or the trigger you want to work through, you're just not going to get the same result. It's really that simple. If NBA defenses don't have to do any work, can sit in the gaps and load up and shrink the floor and even take away pockets of the court from both of these 2 players, for as great as they are, a lot of times it just won't matter, but it makes their job that much more arduous than it actually has to be. And that then in turn compromises the rhythm of the players around them as well as the players with the ball, because it just makes things that much harder. How many times did we hear Devin Booker talk about their lack of spacing in postgame when he had 4 or 5, 6, 7 turnovers in a game? People said he was making excuses, but if you go back and watch the game and the Suns are coming down the court and he's just dribbling up the court and they're getting literally into one action, and that's someone sprinting up in a predictable fashion to set a screen, and he has to work against 2 to the ball, and they're doing that just barely getting across the half-court line with 18, 17, 16 seconds left. The defense hasn't had to work. The Suns cycled through one action that takes some time to set up, and the defense hasn't had to work. So they're just working off of one action. They can shrink the floor. They can predict and communicate before action actually takes place. And all of these factors are working up against the Suns. Similar to that, obviously, post-ups are long developing plays, but that speaks to even more so the need to get into your offense early so that you can get into that trigger, which is a Durant post touch or mid-post touch or nail isolation touch, and then work through the advantages from there with more time on the clock. Them not getting into having nuance to that, or even just having the action take place earlier in the shot clock. All those things just domino effect. One thing leading into another, all of those things leading into a team that left more to be desired on the offensive end, which just is just non-negotiable, should not be happening when you have these 2 players at the top of your roster. Talked about the vanilla offense, talked about the lack of movement for those 2 in particular, and how that will help to free them up, giving the defense something to think about, making them moving targets. That piece would certainly help them with the efficiency, but also on the volume, because you're getting them touches that are dynamic instead of the static variety where a defense can anticipate and load up and things like that. And then the last big thing for me, especially if we're looking at things that we saw them do, which is what we've been doing this entire episode in Volume 2 of Where the Suns Went Wrong, how often did you see those 2 screening for each other off the ball in particular? Imagine Devin Booker setting a flex screen for Kevin Durant to go from one block to the other, and that person that's guarding Devin Booker is naturally going to be smaller than the person that's guarding Kevin Durant. If Devin Booker sets a solid enough screen, they're either going to have issues in terms of communicating that switch in particular. They're going to end up switching it, which gives you an advantage for Kevin Durant, who's going to be posting up someone that's smaller. You're also going to have Devin Booker working off of a pin down in some fashion immediately after that, which is going to present an advantage in and of itself. That's movement taking place early in the shot clock, which we spoke to not happening. That's Kevin Durant having a switch already triggered for him to get that post touch, and Devin Booker having a switch triggered for him to work off of a pin down from. That's an offense in and of itself. And you can spam that in multiple respects. You can get into it multiple different ways, ultimately having one of those two screening for each other. And it just puts the defense in compromise in a different way that we just literally didn't see the Suns do this season. And to that point, outside of their sideline out of bounds actions and some of their baseline out of bounds actions that they cycled through, that was where we saw the most movement, where we saw both of those two players moving at high speeds, but also screening for each other. A lot of times it was the same play, but the fact that it was those two used in the same action on the same side of the court, and Devin Booker either setting or faking that screen in misdirection to then flow off of a screen in some capacity for him to get the ball, and now he's a moving target working into an advantage. Those little things are just what was missing. And they were one of the most effective after timeout and sideline out of bounds, baseline out of bounds teams in terms of points per possession this season. It's not by luck that happened. It's not by happenstance. It's because there was a process, and they trusted that process and leaned into it effectively. Last big thing for me, as we kind of let the dust settle on everything that we just got done speaking to, is with Mike Budenholzer in particular. It's something that I spoke to on the PHNX Suns podcast multiple times throughout the season, but especially before the season started. Maybe the thing I was most excited about was seeing how he could use those two in tandem with Bradley Beal in primary actions. It's a template that we saw them cycle through when Budenholzer was with the Milwaukee Bucks, where he had Jrue Holiday, Chris Middleton, and Giannis Antetokounmpo all using a primary action. Usually it was just in horns alignment, so one of those three players initiating, and then the other two are set up at the elbows. And they had multiple ways in which they could get into action. Oftentimes, they would pitch it to one of those two players at the post, or at the elbow, rather. They could flow into double screens. They could flow into split cuts. They could flow into pick and pop type of actions where the other just cuts through and creates space at that elbow area opposite of where the primary action is taking place. There's just a myriad of options and a myriad of opportunities in which they could cycle through things that they just did not do when they taking Mike Budenholzer and that template that I spoke to with the Bucks and looking at it with the Suns. And I'm just very curious as to why that was not something that was on the plate. I feel like that was a fail-proof type of action that if the Bucks could get the most out of that with Giannis, Jrue, and Chris Middleton, you're telling me that a big three of Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker in that same template couldn't create those very same advantages and be more efficient and more effective and force a defense and put pressure on them in those type of ways even more so? And that just speaks to where the Suns were just honestly puzzling at times on offense. They lost the plot, which we talked about in Volume 1, and they did not get the most out of the Devin Booker, Kevin Durant duo in Volume 2. Those two, I feel like could have had much better offensive seasons if they did see that process be better, if we did see them used in primary actions more often in tandem with one another, and just be better spaced around each other even more. And it's for those reasons, everything that we just got done speaking to in Volume 2 of where the Suns went wrong, that I desire to see these two together again in a more conducive environment around them in terms of the pieces to help them on offense, but also in an environment where there's going to be a coach that has a process, that has those two involved in more primary actions where they might be screening for each other, whether it be pin down varieties or those two screening for each other in pistol actions to flow in the dribble handoffs that flow in the screens, or screens that flow in the dribble handoffs and things like that. There's no way that a team with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant at the top of it should not constantly be putting pressure on a defense in ways that no other team in the league can replicate from 1A to 1B. And because of that, I desire to see them on the same team next season, to see someone get the most out of them and see what that does for the Suns in terms of their floor, raising that, their ceiling, raising that, and copy and pasting that template into a playoff scenario. Thanks for your time. What did you think about everything we talked about today? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the PHNX Sports Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Stephen PG3. I appreciate your time again. Thanks. And until Volume 3,